Hi, I'm Mike Boyle. My background is probably a lot different than most of the other guys who've done the Paneo videos in the past. I've never belonged to a specialized military unit or jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. I have been for most of my adult life affiliated with a law enforcement agency, and that in itself is a somewhat interesting story. I never aspired to be a law enforcement officer when I was young. I went to school and ended up with a degree in environmental science. When I graduated, I went to work for an environmental consulting company doing marine work of all things at a nuclear power plant. A few years later, I ran the clock out with that. Our contract was up, and I ended up in an outfit called the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife Bureau of Law Enforcement. I became a game warden or conservation officer. I always had a lifelong interest in hunting and fishing and that sort of stuff. I like to shoot guns, and this was the job of a lifetime. In short order, they found that I liked guns, and I became a firearms instructor. I've been a firearms instructor for almost 38 years now, teaching a wide variety of weapon systems. Really, the tools that we hadn't changed that much since probably the 1930s. For that matter, the training hadn't changed that much either, relative to weapon craft. We were all issued revolvers. You know, granted back then, we thought we were pretty high speed because we had stainless steel revolvers. But really, when you look at it, the basic action of that gun and whatnot hadn't changed since 1899. Not that there's anything wrong with revolvers, mind you, but the training, once again, was pretty basic. We never had, at first we didn't even have speed loaders. We had dump pouches. If anybody's ever worked with a dump pouch, I would put 7 bullets in there because I know when I open this thing for these bullets to flop out in my hand to do my reload with the revolver, I'd probably drop one. A couple of years after that, we got speed loaders. I mean, we really thought we were cutting edge back then. But the drills that we shot weren't all that great. All we ever did was go to the range and qualify once a year. And we shot these big, huge B-21 targets. You may have seen these on some old TV show or something or another. You have a humanoid shape. It's got all these little numbers on them and whatnot. This style of shooting originated from the FBI back in the 1930s. And really, it hasn't changed that much today in some locales. We might shoot a little different target. We might shoot a little closer. You know, back then we put a big emphasis on being able to shoot at 50 yards with a handgun and 25 yards. Boy, when we shot at 25 yards, I thought it was at really, really close range. We never moved any closer than the 7-yard line to engage our targets. In reality, this was 180 degrees off from the street experience where we dealt with bad guys, once again, at conversational distance. So in some respects, some of the police training we see now is a little bit more relevant. As we moved along over the years, we just started to see some interest in what I would call more tactical training, if you would, for not only the SWAT guys, but for the patrol grunts out there as well. Beginning in the late 80s, early 1990s, we start to see the paradigm shift a little bit, where cops, just road cops, were getting rifles. And this was unheard of back in the day. Since shortly after World War II, shotguns became the police shoulder weapon of choice. And that's not the case anymore. We still see an awful lot of shotguns out there. I think shotguns will always be part of the law enforcement landscape. They may eventually evolve to the specialist tool, but we see a lot of coppers out there with patrol rifles. And I just want to comment on that. I think rifles are a great addition for patrol. Okay, I fought long and hard to get rifles for our guys. The deal is this: you're only as good as your training. I remember looking at this still shot. It was all over the internet a couple of years ago. It was a young female officer responding to a bank robbery. When you looked at this shot, you could see her magazine was literally in her gun backwards. I've got a question. What kind of quality training experience did she get? Something somewhat consistent in law enforcement and military firearms training. We want to get the most amount of people up to a minimum level of competency at minimum expense. Fortunately, I did not work for an organization who subscribed to that theory. We train long and hard on my job. We probably train twice as much as most other folks, and the reason's pretty simple. Just about everybody we come in contact with has a gun. Even fishermen we come in contact with have knives. And a lot of the business we conduct is far off the beaten path. So we've been very, very serious about firearms and firearms training. We typically have rifles and shotguns in the cars. These guys are running Glock 17 pistols as they have for the last 30 years. And their training, I think, is probably a little bit more intense than the average bear out there. I think things are improving a little bit. We see a lot of outfits have taken to doing some force-on-force training, simunitions, if you would, marking cartridges. Electronic simulators are fairly common now. When we combine all this stuff with some live fire, big plus. Another one of my pet peeves is very often we, the firearms trainers, don't communicate with the guys doing the empty hand stuff. And we really need to be on the same wavelength. For police officers, you just can't be a gun guy. You have to be a force generalist, because you don't know when things unfold, whether it's going to be resolved with empty hand control, perhaps some sort of intermediate weapon like a baton or a chemical spray or a taser, or you have to go up to a firearm. I'm of the feeling there have been an awful lot of police officers killed or seriously injured. They did not have the right tools to control a physical confrontation, and unfortunately it's escalated to a confrontation where they were cut, shot, perhaps even with their own weapon. So we're making a little bit of progress in the area, but it's moving pretty much along at glacial speed. I hope it improves a little bit more. Over the years, I've been involved in instruction of a wide variety of different types of firearms, primarily handgun, shotgun, rifles, even submachine guns, precision rifles. I not only teach in my job, I regularly teach at some of the local police academies. I've been a police academy assistant director. I've been a police academy rangemaster and firearms instructor. For 21 years, I served on the board of directors of the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. And for most of that time, as a matter of fact, for just about all that time, I was the chairman of their regional training committee, traveling around the country, providing training to law enforcement firearms instructors. In 2011, I conceived the concept of master instructor development, where I traveled far and near, bringing quality training. I went out and found subject matter experts on various firearms disciplines, specifically pistol, rifle, shotgun, and brought them in to teach classes, trying to bring quality training to law enforcement officers at a good price. I continue to do a little bit of that stuff. I've dialed that back quite a bit. I've always found this to be quite a bit of fun. To this very day, I still work at the police academy. I teach a lot of low light stuff out there, some shotgun stuff. We host different things at my facility and teach them different classes there as well. And this has been a real positive experience coming out here and making this video. For about the last 30 years or so, I've been a contributor to some of the firearms periodicals, some over the newsstand, you buy off the newsstand. I've written for just about all the major magazines at one time or another. I recently completed a book called, imagine this, Combative Shotgun. And it talks about using the shotgun as a self-defense weapon for both police officers or armed citizens. One of the rewards I've gotten from teaching police officers over the years is we give them the tools to stay safe. I've had a number of occasions where people have called me up, emailed, whatever, and said, hey, remember that thing you taught me back, whatever? And of course, I don't remember. I mean, I train hundreds of people a year probably in a law enforcement type environment, and I forget the faces. Often what I hear from these folks is this, either something I said or something that was taught in a class that I was present at. There was some tidbit of information they picked up or some technique, and they used it to save their lives. Quite frankly, there's no amount of money in this world that gives me that sort of satisfaction. You know, somebody tells you that, your feet are about 3 feet off the ground all day. It's been a great ride. In closing, I'd like to say, no matter what you heard, that thing about the pig and the midget and the fishnet stockings, that wasn't me, that was Dave Spalding. Thank you very much.